So, welcome all to my talk on business intelligence and data testing. Now, this is not a topic you hear a lot about on conferences, but data is becoming, more and more important. It's the life force of any application, and business critical decisions are really made on data analytics. And it offers a new opportunity for testers. It gives a new chance to expand your testing skills. But in my presentation, I also want to take you along in some thoughts on how you can incorporate data in your test strategy, even if you're not in a data project. So, about me, I am a lead quality and testing expert at Society the Netherlands, almost 15 years of experience as a tester. And my link with BI and data testing is that I'm the guild leader of our BI and data testing guild. And I'm also a member of our testing community's core team, where I hold the BI and data testing portfolio. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. So we are going to look at the basics of the BI and data landscape. We're going to look at data quality and how to test that. We'll do a short deep dive into data profiling and some other test techniques you can use. And lastly, we'll look at your strategy. So let's dive into the basics. This is what a basic BI and data landscape looks like. So you start with the source. That can be anything. It can be legacy systems or databases or files. And then you get to the ETL layer. So extract, transform, and load. The idea is that you combine all of the data from the different sources into one big data warehouse. That way you can make data analytics that really take all of the data you have available into consideration. So the extract goes to a staging environment. That's a one-on-one extraction. That's data as is. Now, here in the picture, the transform is shown as a different staging environment, but that's not always the case. More often we see that the transformations are being done as the data is being loaded into the data warehouse. And the transformations are necessary because your different sources can have different ways of writing down the data. Think of date annotations or the way addresses are written. Perhaps some columns need to be combined. Maybe different currencies need to be calculated into the same currency. It can be all sorts of things. So before all the data is combined, you need the transformations. Then next to that, we have the optional part. That's the data marts. Data marts are subsections of your data warehouse. They are still connected to the data warehouse. And now you might think, well, we went through all of the trouble to combine all of the data. Why now split it up again? The reason for that can be twofold. One is security privacy. So you can make sure that the sales department only sees the sales data. And the other is speed, the performance, because a data warehouse can easily have over 10,000 of lines of records and a lot of columns, which makes it slow to do quick calculations. And in the end, what the business end user usually wants to see is the dashboarding and reporting side. So that's the front end side. As you can see, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. And of course, at the bottom, don't forget, there has to be an audit trail. So where is the testing in this? Well, I think the first one is pretty clear. You start with a migration. Then you get a combined migration with transformations. Don't forget the data quality, because garbage in is garbage out. So you want to have good data quality. Then the business side is about access, but it's also about fit for purpose. Are we giving the business the data they need to do their work? Are we showing the right things? And of course, you have an entire end-to-end data flow. And lastly, rules and regulations. For instance, in the European Union, we have the right to be forgotten. So any company that has data on you, you can request them to purge that data. Now, in your data warehouse, well, this is a regulation that you have to adhere to, but you don't want to purge, for instance, the sales records that are attached to a certain customer, because that still counts for your sales data. So you need to think of a way to have a workflow in order for things like this. And of course, auditing is always important. What kind of skills would you need? Well, I think it's pretty clear that for all of the migration stuff, you need SQL querying. Some knowledge on database modeling would also be helpful. Not in depth, but just a general thought on how a database looks like, or perhaps a data vault looks like, things like that. For data quality, you mainly need to know about the business and about rules and regulations. And for dashboarding, well, it's very useful to at least know how a dashboarding tool works. So what about data quality then? Because in general, how do we measure quality? And I think the ISO 25010 guideline is a well-known guideline for testers. So this is for systems and software quality requirements. Yeah, systems and software. It doesn't really fit when you're trying to test data, a data environment, data quality. So, of course, I'm not the only one who thought that. But luckily, there is the DAMA, the Data Management Association. And their UK chapter came up with these 6 data quality dimensions, because they wanted a way to really measure data quality. Now, in the next slides, we'll look at each of these. The slides will also have an example on them. So they're quite boring slides with a lot of text. We'll not go into in depth in all of them. So feel free, if you're watching the recording, to pause the screen to read the example if you want. The first one, completeness and uniqueness. I show them at the same time because I feel that they're different sides to the same coin. Because the first thing you do when you're testing any sort of migration is counting records. How many did you have in your source? How many do you expect after the migration? If you have less, then there might be something wrong with your completeness. Then you might have been missing a few of the records. If you have more, there might be doubles. And that sounds weird, but this does happen. It can be a manual tryout of a migration that went wrong. It can be a batch that failed halfway and then gets retried. It's not uncommon. So this is often not specifically tested. Most people just check, do I have everything? But they forget to check if you have any doubles. And timeliness. Now this one is about how long does it take when you insert new data into your data warehouse, or perhaps even in your source, until you see it all the way in your reporting. Now, for most companies, this is not a critical factor. It can be days, perhaps a week. But there are companies where this is really important. I have a colleague who is a data tester for the Dutch National Police, and she tests the data warehouse behind the app that police officers on the street have. So as they are scanning license plates, they need to have near real-time information about whether or not the driver has his car insurance, or whether or not he maybe needs to be arrested. Is there an arrest warrant? You don't want to let criminals go because, well, the data is behind. So for her, testing on timeliness means there's rules about, I think it has to be within 30 minutes update, something like that. So no, this really shows that you need to look how important it is for you. Validity. In short, does it adhere to the business rules? So the example here is clear. No, customers that have to be 18 years old or anybody who's younger is not valid. But it can also be more abstract. If you have a student database and they have a class and the class is defined in the business rules as number, letter, two numbers, and anything that doesn't adhere to that is invalid. So it can be any kind of business rule. Something that overlaps with validity sometimes is accuracy. Accuracy is about, does it fit real life, the real world? And I think you can already see here what the problem is. So the example shows some people with impossible ages, so they have to be inaccurate. But you don't always know what the real world situation is. If somebody enters their name as Tester McTesterson, well, sounds weird, but I have nothing to compare it to. I don't have access to people's registered names. So try to find fields that you can test. In the Netherlands, it's, for instance, a zip code has to combine with a certain street name. Otherwise, it's not a valid address. Something like that. And here, well, the customers with impossible ages, these you can be sure about. But what if somebody is 103? It's improbable, but not impossible. So this one is tricky. And here it shows a very nice percentage, but in reality, this one you can never test for sure. But at least you can already point out some records that are inaccurate. And consistency is about whether or not the data is consistent across the sources. So the example here is that customers that have different addresses in different databases. And if you want to combine that into your data warehouse, you need to find out which one is true. Now, if you want to incorporate data quality into your testing, you need to first identify which data items you want to check for. Because you may have 100 columns and you're not going to do all of them. Although you can automate some of them, but think about what you want to test and against which data quality dimension you want to test. Don't forget about the range, what is good and what is bad. Often we just start testing without knowing, well, now I have a percentage, so is this acceptable? Is it not acceptable? Think about that. And of course, you need to actually do the test and review and correct. Now, I think there are some other things you could take into consideration. Let's not go too deep into this. I want to point out sustainability. Data storage takes a lot of energy, especially if there's also a backup. All of the batch processing takes energy. You could question, do we need a backup of the backup? But I know that the tester generally doesn't have a say in things like this. But honestly, that never stops me from asking questions. Just teasing a bit. I think that's always okay to do. Now, let's do the deep dive. Because you may think, well, what is my test basis? But we'll get to that. First, data profiling. So data profiling is the process of examining the data available from an existing information source and collecting statistics or informative summaries about that data. In short, we look at the source and find interesting stuff. Well, the source, as we saw before, files, databases, legacy systems, but also your test documentation. And in a BI and data landscape, that looks like this. It's your source to target mapping. This is a simplified version, of course, but the build-up is the same. You have your source columns, what transformations are going to be done to them, and where they're going to end up in the data warehouse. Now, those informative summaries or interesting statistics, this is where you find what you're going to look for. So let's do it together. We start with two name fields. It's a direct mapping, but it's always good to check the special characters and character sets, especially if you're in an international environment. You may have different character sets that are used in different sources. Are they taken into account in the new data warehouse? Gender. Now this one has a transformation in it. And the transformation here only takes male, female, and unknown. There's no exception possible. So I would check if those are truly the only values in the source available. And now this sounds like a really simple example, because of course source to target mapping is really thought out. It's careful consideration. So who would make such a silly mistake that there are other values? But I got this example from a real world situation where the data modeler was talking to the business, and they told him that they had a form for filling out for new customers, and that had a drop-down field. Drop-down field for gender only had male, female, and unknown. They had been using this form since the start of their application. That what nobody remembered is that way in the beginning, the gender field was not a drop-down field, but a free format field. So somewhere deep down in their database, they did have some other values. And the tester found those values using data profiling. So even before the data warehouse was built, just based on this source to target mapping, she found a bug. And it could be prevented because it was clear that the transformation was going to break. So don't overlook what you think is way too simple. It's still valuable to check. Next one, interesting, ID field. You can see that the target length is shorter than the source length. We're also going to cast it to number, and it's going to be a primary key. So of course you're going to check for the maximum value length, uniqueness, and missing values. If you want to cast a string to a number, it can only have numbers. And the last one seems like a no-brainer. It's a direct mapping and nothing is going to happen to it. The field is becoming longer. Why would you check on email? Well, I would still check the patterns, because, and here is where your business knowledge comes in handy. If you know that the sales department or the marketing department uses this field to send out promotions, then they might be interested to hear that 20% of the database has an invalid email address that has a white space in it, or the missing @ sign. So even though that according to the source to target mapping, there's nothing to test here, by knowing about the business and the importance of a certain field, there's still something that you can check. Some of these you can do with SQL, but there's also a tooling tip. Something like Data Cleaner can really do these things in like seconds. I wish I had the time for a demo because this tool is really nice to use, but I don't, so sorry. And I think the benefits are clear. Like I said, the shift left, finding issues before the data warehouse is even being built. But you can also find some interesting test cases, some things that you want to track through the data flow. And like I said, with email address, you can only assess the data quality. So you're now assessing the data quality at the source level. And that's already very handy. But remember, it's not the tester's job to actually fix bad quality. We just report on it. And I think it is our task to report on it, but that's it. That's where it ends. Of course, there are other test techniques you can also use. I'll point out the boundary value analysis. Sometimes categories are made, like age categories based on customers' date of birth, or aggregations for yearly sales records or yearly sales numbers. And there it's always interesting that Most companies have a book year from January to December, but in the Netherlands, some companies somehow have a book year starting in April. So April to March. Make sure those calculations are correct. And the last one here is prediction queries. I have a slide. I'm not going too deep into that, but basically you build the ETL flow using SQL. Quickly skipping on this. Because I want to talk about strategy. So what to do with data. And it depends on the type of project that you're in. So you can be in an actual BI and data or data warehousing project, but you can also be in a functional testing project where you're testing a new application that replaces an existing one. Or you can be testing a whole new application. And these three have different approaches, but all three use data. Now, if you're in a BI and data warehousing project, of course, data and data quality are going to be your main focus. And you can look at that from three layers. So you look at the quality of the data itself, but also the quality of the system. So this is the batch processing. Is that going in order? The migrations, the extract, the transformations, is it showing in the dashboards? All the components of the landscape need to be tested. And finally, the end-to-end data flow. So you follow the data all the way from the source until the reporting and dashboarding. So through all of those components that you saw, now you combine them and you check the flow. Now, if you're in a project where you're testing an application that replaces an existing one, and this happens a lot, I've tested this a lot as well. That means there will be a data migration. Now, generally, that means there's going to be a data migration team. That team is separate from the functional testing team. But yeah, in my experience, that's a shame. Because whenever I talk to migration specialists, they tell me that the front-end GUI can definitely have an effect on how data is shown on the front-end side. And in end-to-end testing, I think it's important that you think about what type of data you're using. Are you using data that's newly created in your new app or that's migrated from the old app? And really reach out to that migration team. Is there anything that they worry about? And perhaps using data profiling, they can find some risky records for you to put in a first test migration. That you can also check the front end side. Because data migration, on front end, it always looks like one big step. One moment, there's no data, the next, it's migrated and it's all there. In reality, migration is a lot of small steps. And that's where the migration specialist is looking at. They are in the middle of the migration process. Now, if it's a big project, there might also be a BI and data tester that does the data level checks, but both are testing from the backend. And like I said, sometimes the front-end GUI can have an effect on how the data is actually shown to end users. So I think there's also a role for the front-end tester to always make sure to do a check on application level right after migration to really work together with the migration team. Now, lastly, if you're in a whole new application, a whole new project, then my advice is to follow the data flow because pretty much no application stands on its own anymore, not in modern times and difficult digital landscapes. So how is it connected to other applications? Does it make use of any existing data, any databases it gets connected to, and any data that gets entered into the new application? Where does it go to? Where is it stored? So this is what I mean by following the data flow. Where is the data coming from? Where is it going to? All of those data connections, they need some extra end-to-end testing. I don't know, but it's good to find out. So, in short, we looked at what the BI and data landscape looks like, how you can actually test for data quality by making use of data profiling, and how data and data quality can and should be a part of test strategy in different types of projects.